Teresa. I'm here with Miss Kallie, who is going to be going over infant gross motor milestones today. So I'm going to hand it over to Miss Kallie because it looks like we are live on Facebook. And she will introduce herself and get started.
Hello, everybody. My name is Kallie. I work at the Boca office. I will start by telling you a little bit about myself. So I graduated with a bachelor's in kinesiology from David Lipscomb University in Nashville, Tennessee. And then I moved down here to Florida and I went to Nova Southeastern University for my doctorate in physical therapy. So now I'm working with Progressive. It's been a little over 3 years. And like I said, I work in the Boca Raton location. Today, I have the privilege of speaking to you guys about infant development. So I'm going to touch base on normal infant development and abnormal infant development towards the end. So what I'm going to start doing is I'm going to share my screen because I'm going to bring up a test that we typically use to talk about normal development. We use it to scale kids with early motor delay to be able to explain to parents where they're at, to show them how far behind they are or where their motor skills are. So I'm going to bring that up to share with you guys so that you can see the pictures as I go along to talk about the normal skills, okay? And if you're just logging in now, again, my name's Kallie. I'm a physical therapist in the Boca Raton location. I'm going to be discussing with you guys today during lunch infant development. We're going to talk first about typical development, and then we're going to talk about atypical development, okay? So give me just a second. I'm going to share my screen. Oh, it's not letting me share my screen. When Teresa gets back, I'll have her enable that so that I can share the screen. So give me just a second. But first, what I'll do is I'll just go ahead and start talking. And then as we start to see the pictures, I'll come back to them so that you can see. So for a typically developing infant, we'll start. Teresa, hey, can you hear me? Can you enable the screen share for me, please? Thank you. Thank you. Okay. Give me just a second, guys. I'm just enabling this now so that I can show you. Okay, here we go. All right, so this test is called the Ames test. It goes up to about 18 months or so. So I'm not gonna go all the way up to 18 months. I'm specifically gonna talk about 0 to 12 months, but I just wanted you to be able to see these pictures as we go along. So this first picture, if you look at the prone section, so prone means that they're on their bellies. So when we're talking about infant development and motor skills, we're looking at them on their bellies, on their back, sitting, and then eventually standing. So this first page is going to be skills relatively between the 0 to 3 and 4 month mark. So I'm going to start with prone. So prone means on their belly. So every baby usually starts off in this physiological flexion, which is the #1 prone lying. Or if you look on supine on their back, it says supine lying. So that's them still going into that flexion posture. It's almost like the fetal position that we curl up in sometimes. So babies first start in that position. And then after about a month or so, they start being able to elongate and open up. So that's where you see that their hands, maybe when they're on their back, fall to their sides, or maybe they start to briefly lift their heads up in tummy time. So around that 2-month mark, you might see that your baby can lift their head up to about 45 degrees. They can maybe look and rotate their head to both sides. So if you put them on their belly, they should be able to lift their head just briefly to be able to rotate it each direction. Same around about 3 months or so, you might see the hands start to come down to the side when they're on their back. You might see them start to go on their chest. And eventually, they're going to go from physiological flexion to opening up to hands down or on the chest to starting to reach out against gravity. And that's on their back. So around the 3-month mark, you might see them start to put their hands in their mouth a lot or turn their head to the side to be able to put their hands in their mouth. When they're on their bellies and prone, they should be able to start to push through their elbows a little bit. Their hands might be behind their shoulders, but they start to lift their heads up again about maybe 45 degrees, between that 45 and 90 degree position. Then closer to the 4-month mark, you start to see them go into this picture over here, which is they start to get their elbows more in line with their shoulders. They start to push up and away, so you get all of this elongation through their neck and they might be able to get their heads up to about 90 degrees. You see the legs come down, there's more extension, kind of an arching in their back that you start to see. When they're on their backs, you might start to see that they're reaching for toys around this phase. If you have a little mobile over them, around 3 to 4 months, they might start reaching and lifting their hands off their chest. They might even start bringing their knees into their chest, and they discover their knees. And then after their knees is their feet. So they start to acknowledge that lower part of their body. And this is a really important skill to start building core strength, to start establishing midline head control and trunk control, being able to lift the legs up and have the pelvis in neutral. And this is the precursor for them rolling. So once they start bringing their knees up and their feet up, then they start kind of rocking back and forth and weight shifting on their back, eventually to get them to their side. So again, these skills here, both on their belly and on their back, are relatively around that 0 to maybe 4 month mark. So if we scroll down, I'm going to go into sitting and standing. So standing is not going to come until a little bit later, but let's go back to sitting. So sitting, if we place our babies initially, maybe around that 2 month mark, 2 to 3 month mark, and we place them in sitting and give them that trunk support underneath their armpits, through their chest and through their ribs, you should see that they should be able to align their head with their trunk and have a little bit of extension in their backs to sit up and maintain their head briefly. Once they get closer to this 4 and 5 month mark, they start to sit with what we call propped arms. So propped arms, meaning that they're sitting on the ground with a wide base of support through their legs. And if you put their hands on the ground forward, they should be able to stabilize themselves for a little bit with their head up. So this is called prop sitting, and that's around the 5 month mark. Also around this time, if we do a pull to sit, which is if we grab their hands and start to pull them towards us, we should see good neck strength. We should see a chin tuck. We shouldn't see their head lag back like this. So a little piece of advice too is if you are pulling on their hands and they're having trouble getting their chin tucked down into their chest, you can go up higher with your handling. So instead of grabbing their hands, maybe grab their arms or grab their bicep area or grab their shoulders. That would be the highest place. So start higher if they need more stability. And as they get stronger over time and you see that good chin tuck, you can lower your hands down a little bit further and they should be able to support themselves. Now, when we look at standing, in the beginning, when you put a baby in stand, they don't have that head control and that trunk control yet. So you see that big curvature in their spine. But after about 2 months or so, you should be able to see that they briefly bring their head and their trunk in alignment with good support that you give them right underneath their arms. If we go down, so now we're going to still be looking at the skills: prone on their belly, supine on their back, sitting, and standing, but we're getting into that 5 month marker plus. So in prone, what we're looking for at 4 months is that they should be able to push on extended arms. So that means that if they're on their belly, you see a nice arch in their back, you see their head up, you see that elongation through their neck, and you see them pushing with their hands against the floor. You should see their elbows straightening, and they're not so much sustained on their elbows anymore to be able to hold themselves up. They're trying to push and get out of it. Also at this time, around that 4 to 5 month marker, you might start to see your babies roll. And to be honest, I've seen both. Sometimes it's that they go from their belly to their back first. Sometimes it's that they go from their back to their belly first. So what we care the most about is, again, that it's around that 4 or 5 month marker, that they're able to weight shift side to side through each hand, and that they're able to roll symmetrically over each side. Around 5 months is also the swimming pattern. So if you ever put your baby on the ground and you see that their hands are behind them, their feet are up in the air, they've got a big arch in their back, that's called swimming. They also start reaching at this phase on their belly. And they also start this big one, which is called pivoting. So this is their ability to rotate on their bellies in a circle, side to side. So this is the phase where you might see them in their crib, and then all of a sudden they end up in a completely different position. And it's because of this prone pivoting motion. So once they get strong by pushing up on their hands, they start moving to the side to be able to pivot each direction. And then come about 6 months is where you start to see them drawing their knees into their chest, using that core strength to go up on hands and knees in preparation for crawling. Now, if we look at them on their backs in supine, what we see is we see them bringing their knees in, bringing their feet in, finding their feet, being able to start rolling, holding onto their feet, and all of a sudden they roll to their side. And then they get that disassociation between their bodies and their heads, and they start rotating their trunk all the way in order to get to their bellies. So again, this is around that 5-6 month marker where they start rolling really, really well. They might try around 4 months, but it gets really good around 5-6 months. Now, when we look at sitting, remember prop sitting is at 5 months, then 6, so that's around this phase. Then at 6 months, they should start sitting without upper extremity support. So that means that they start to take their hands off or they hold on to a toy and they're sitting there just with their bottoms on the ground, and that's it. And then their sitting gets perfected because they start extending more through their spine. They start rotating through their trunk. And then closer to that 7-8 month marker is where they start really reaching outside of their base support, rotating their trunk over both directions to prepare for transitions to get into hands and knees for crawling. And then same thing around this time, around the 5-6 month marker, when you put a baby in supported stand, they should put good weight through their legs. You should see them trying to push and extend back. You don't want to see kind of a floppy baby that isn't pushing back and extending and aligning their head with their trunk to be able to stand up. So now we're gonna go down a little bit more. So this next section based off of prone motor skills is coming into this 6 to 8, almost 9 month mark. So in this phase, you start to see babies propping up on their side. You start to see them transitioning. So again, that's around 7 or 8 months where they start to transition out of sit to get on hands and knees. And then you see really good reciprocal crawling anywhere from 6 to 9 months. So at the earliest, usually about 6 months, and then still within the normal range, closer to that 8, almost 9 month marker. Sometimes babies will push back with their hands into sit first, or they'll crawl backwards first. Some babies will army crawl first, right around that 6 month marker, and then closer to 7 or 8, they'll start to push up onto hands and knees to crawl on hands and knees. And then once they get good with this position, they start playing around with it a little bit. So they start trying to transition to get ready to stand. Some babies will plank around, again, that 8-9 month marker. In terms of sitting, around 7-8 months, they start to transition out of sit into hands and knees. So that's where if you put your baby in sit and you put some toys on either side of them, they might start turning their bodies to be able to reach those toys for exploration. Okay, and now when we talk about pulling to stand, so that's this phase, pulling to stand. So pulling to stand usually happens anywhere, depending on when they crawl. It could be as early as maybe 7 months. And on average, it's usually closer to 9 months, 9-10 months where they start pulling to stand. So what they'll start with is they'll start by crawling up to something, reaching up for that surface with their hands, using more upper extremity support to kind of pull themselves at first. And they get into what we call a tall kneel position. So that's where they're with both knees down and they're holding on to something, a bench, a piece of furniture, mom and dad. They could be holding on to anything with their hands. And then what they do is they roll over their toes, use their core, push with their hands, and go up into stand. So this is a phase where you got to be real careful with them because they're very likely to fall over. So stay behind them, just kind of keep them safe, cage them, but it's a really great phase for them to start exploring. Then once they pull to stand, they might stand supported, holding on with one hand, trying to hold a toy and still stabilize themselves. They may also try at closer to the 10-11 month mark, sidestepping. So that's what we call cruising. So maybe they're along the couch and you have the remote on the side and they start going sideways, sidestepping towards that remote. That's called cruising. So that's usually around 11 months. They also start getting more mature in their pull to stands, and they do something called half kneeling around that 10 to 11 month mile mark. So that's where they go into tall kneel initially with both knees on the ground, holding with their hands. But now they don't need as much upper extremity support to push or pull with their hands. So they start lifting one leg up and they get into a half kneel and then they push with that leg to stand. So it's a more mature movement. Eventually we'll use that as an adult too, where we're standing up from the floor. We lift one leg up at a time to be able to stand. And then closer to 11, 12 months, they start doing all kinds of fun stuff. So they start letting go, experimenting with letting go. Maybe they play the toy game where they're playing with something on the furniture and then they drop it on the ground and they either want you to go get it or they lower themselves to the floor to go get it. And then maybe they rise to stand again to be able to stand up. So they do a little squat. They may start around 12 months letting go. Getting comfortable standing unsupported. Maybe they get really courageous and they take a couple steps. So early stepping is what we would expect around that 12-month marker. And then from there, they start progressing into squatting. Maybe they get up into a plank position or a bear crawl position to get ready to stand up without using any support at all from their hands. And then the goal is to start walking alone. And then the last skill on this test is called a squatted play position. So what that is where you can put a toy down in front of them and they don't fall down immediately anymore. They squat down, they control themselves with their ankles, with their core, and they sit there and they play with a toy for a little bit. So all of these skills that we just went through are typical, normal infant development. This is what we would expect out of our kiddos. I'm gonna bring up another sheet now. Give me just a second. Okay, here we go. All right, so that was typical infant development. So those are the things that we would expect out of a baby, and that's the normal routine that we would expect out of a baby to see their gross motor skill development. Now we're going to talk about atypical development. So I'm just going to briefly go over this because there's a lot of different things that could be considered atypical. This is going to be, this website is a really great website for parents. So this is called pathways.org. If you go here, they have all different kinds of really great skills, great ideas to be able to compare and to see if you have any questions. But I really liked this comparison. This is of a 6-month-old baby. So you'll see the same kind of atypical patterns in a 2-month, 4-month, 6-month, 8-month, but they get a little bit stronger over time, but the same types of things that you see here atypically are what you're going to see again at 2 months and 4 months as well. So this is 6 months. We're going to start by talking about this. Number one, and something that I see very often in the clinic is torticollis and plagiocephaly. So number one, if you see that your baby is only rotating their head to one side, if you see that they have an asymmetrical weakness on one side of their body, that's a reason to consult your pediatrician or to consult a physical therapist and see if something's going on, because that is atypical. Babies should be very symmetrical in all of their movements. A lot of times parents will tell me that they think that their baby's going to be left-handed or right-handed already at just a few months old, but usually that's not a good sign. You usually don't see hand dominance come in until closer to 2 to 4 years old. So early on, especially up 0 to 12 months, you should see a very symmetrical pattern of play and motor skills for your baby. You should see both legs moving symmetrically. You should see both arms moving symmetrically, their ability to rotate their head to either side symmetrically. So that's a big thing that we see. If you see that your baby's doing something very, very good on one side and they're not really using their other side of the body, that could be atypical. So pay attention to that. Now when we look over typical and atypical development here. So typical, again, this is for a 6-month-old. So at 6 months in supine on their back, what you would be able to see is you'd be able to see them lifting their legs up. They should be touching their knees, touching their toes, reaching against gravity with their hands in midline. So that's why this baby has a toy. Now, if you look at the atypical position, that baby has their legs spread open. The arms are still out to the side, which looks more like a 2-month-old. They're not trying to make any connection with the toy. They're not trying to bring hands or bring legs towards midline and against gravity. So that could be a number of things. It could be a connectivity reciprocal play issue. It could be a little bit of what we call low tone. So maybe the muscles just struggle to work against gravity, or they're hyperlax, meaning they're very flexible. So that's not a typical presentation that we would see when we put a baby on their back at 6 months. We should see them trying to engage and flex and go towards that toy. Now, when we look inside lying at 6 months, so remember, rolling usually takes place around 4 to 5 months where it starts, and it gets really good around 6 months. So this baby, the second you put a toy next to them, they're already trying to roll. And in this position, you can see the disassociation of the body from the neck. So the whole body's rolled over, the neck is coming up against gravity. He's overreaching with his hand, going for that toy. So you see reciprocal play. When you look at the other baby, atypically, you put the toy on the side. He's looking for it, which is good. However, the parent is trying to facilitate the legs to move, and the upper body is not engaged at all. So that's an atypical response. What we would like to see is we'd like to see that other hand coming over across the body. We'd like to see the tummy engaged and the core working to draw that upper hand over. So that's side lying. When we look at prone on their bellies, at this age, remember at 4 months, a baby should be able to push up and extend their arms. So this baby is extended with one arm because he's reaching, and the other arm's on his elbow, which is fine too. He's playing. So you can see he's got good shoulder girth, shoulder stability. He's reaching with one hand. He's weight shifted to one side. He's engaged. He's playing. Now, if you look at the other baby's got a few things going on here. So for 6 months, that baby's not getting his head up to 90 degrees. The baby, if you look at the alignment of the elbow with the shoulder, the elbows are still behind the shoulders. At this phase, you should see the elbows in line with the shoulders or a little further in front of the shoulders. And that would give that elongation through their chest and their neck to be able to lift their head higher. So he's going into more arching and extension through his back, having trouble propping on his elbows and getting his head control and his neck up. If we look at pull to sit now, so pull to sit at this age, they should have really good neck control. The facilitator is grabbing the baby's hands, and he's got his arms bent. He's resisting back, trying to pull himself up. The head is the neck is tucked in. Now, when we look at the other baby is trying to use everything that he's got. So the legs are coming up, the arms, they feel floppy, they feel like spaghetti, they're just kind of giving away from him. His head is hyperextended back, he doesn't have a good chin tuck. So this is an atypical presentation of a pull to sit. Now when we go to sitting, if you look at the typical baby in sitting, the parent is at 6 months. Again, this baby shouldn't be prop sitting anymore. They should be sitting without hands. You can see the baby's resting his hands comfortably on his legs. He's got a good wide base of support. The spine is nice and straight. The head is in line with the trunk, and the facilitator isn't even holding the baby. Now, when we look at the atypical presentation at 6 months, the facilitator is holding the baby right above the chest, right under the armpits. And the higher up you go, the more support you're giving to that baby. If this facilitator were to be holding the baby on their thighs, then they would be controlling their whole trunk themselves, but she's not, or he's not. They're holding the baby up high under the armpits, and the baby is still struggling to have extension through their spine and getting their head in line with their trunk to be able to sit up nice and tall. So that's an atypical presentation. The next one is horizontal suspension. So if we tip a baby forward, what we're looking for is we're looking for them to be able to want to, protect themselves and get out of it. So we should see hyperextension in their spine. We might, which you're going to see on the next one, protective extension. You should see those hands come down to protect themselves. The atypical baby, when they tip them horizontal, there's really very limited, he's very horizontal. There's very limited arch in his back to try to hold his body up and his head up. And then when we look at the protective extension, the baby is not trying to put his hands down. He's not pushing away from the ground to protect himself. He looks like he's going to bonk his head on the ground. So that's atypical. Now the last one, standing. So standing at 6 months, when you put a baby in standing and you support them because they can't stand by themselves yet, you should still see that their legs try to push against the ground. You feel good weight bearing through their legs. You might see that extension in their spine, and they align their head with their trunk. An atypical presentation baby is a baby that is got a big bend in their knees. They're not really pushing against the ground, trying to hold their bodies up. You feel like they're spaghetti in your arms. You're trying to put them there, but they're just not holding themselves up. Okay, so this is kind of just a brief synopsis of atypical development. So also just remember with these things that I said here and that we went over on this slide. We also want to pay attention to symmetry. We want to also pay attention to reciprocal play. So making sure that your baby is connecting with you, making sure that they have good eye contact, making sure that they reciprocate smiles and imitations of you cooing with them. Those are all typical presentations that we should see as well. If you don't see those things, especially within the first year, by 12 months, that they don't respond to their name, that they aren't imitating you, that they're not speaking any small words like mom, dad, if they're still having trouble holding their head up and having their head on their body without their trunk falling over to the side, if they're not crawling by 10 months, if they're not sitting by 10 months independently, those are all signs that there is something maybe going on, and you would want to consult your pediatrician or your physical therapist to try and find out more information, okay? So that is all that I have for you today. And I'm going to turn it back over to Teresa now, okay? Thank you, guys.
All right, let's see. I'm trying to stop the screen share.
That's what I was trying to do too. Stop share. There we go.
There we go.
Okay.
All right, so if anybody has any questions on anything that was covered today, feel free to ask in the comments. We can answer any questions now. Otherwise, we can also get to your questions later on as well if you're watching this as a replay. Thank you so much, Kallie, for sharing all of that. That was very helpful. And I don't think we have quite any questions at the moment, so I will just share. Every Tuesday, we're, at least through the end of the summer, we're doing story time. So if anybody tuned in yesterday, you got to see Miss Megan with her rendition of There's a Monster in Your Book, which was amazing. And then we will continue doing these lunch and learns on various topics. So if anybody has any ideas for topics that they really would like to hear about, please comment with those as well, because then we can find someone on our staff who does have a lot of training in that area to come and share their experience. So I don't think we have any questions. So thank you everybody for tuning in. Anything else to add, Kallie, before we go?
I think that's it. Thank you guys so much.
All right. Thank you, everybody. Thanks for tuning in. Bye.
Bye. Take care.